You roll into being an analyst on television, you want to prove yourself. I can tell you what all these coverages are, and I can use all this terminology that nobody else knows what it is. Took me a long time to realize that and understand that. And it's hard because you have it back here, but when you distribute that, it doesn't mean that anybody knows what in the world you're talking about. It really became something of, there are ways to explain this game that are not really complicated. It's like my buddy Ben Leard, who I just told you about a minute ago. His number one quote when we were in college: football ain't hard. He used to say it all the time. And we would come up and we'd see these different looks. And he's like, guys, he was from Hartwell, Georgia. Football ain't hard. I was like, you know what? He's right. Like, we just block people, tackle people, score touchdowns. Like, that's it. A lot of times I see people that are trying to be analysts or trying to do their own thing. And it's just like all this verbatim and this jargon. And I even get lost. And I'm thinking, man, if I'm kind of lost, what's the guy that never played football thinking watching the show right now? So if you can mix a little bit of the informative side and have fun with it and enjoy it, I also think, Phil, there's a part of it that, like, excuse my language, but like, I can't believe I'm doing this shit for a living, to be honest with you.
The Field Talk podcast is presented by Rhoback. If you're not familiar with Rhoback, it's time to get familiar with Rhoback, as they have all of the best gear, basically from head to toe. I live in these hoodies. I consider them a signature item from the brand, but I can also tell you that every time I head to rhoback.com, there is new merch dropping. So do the same thing. Head on over to rhoback.com and enter my name, Field, F-I-E-L-D, for 20% off of your first order. The SEC is filled with college football. I mean that in every way. Many of the best teams play in the SEC and compete for the national championship. Many of the best players play in the SEC and compete to be top draft picks in the NFL. That's a great thing. It also means that separating yourself as somebody who covers the SEC is a difficult thing to do. There are lots of people who want to do it. But if you watch SEC sports, you know the name Cole Cubelic, who has become one of the most recognizable and trusted voices on all things SEC, especially SEC football. Cole is a former player at Auburn who is now a trusted media voice, not just at ESPN, where he's one of my colleagues, but on several different platforms. And what I love about watching Cole or listening to him is that everything he does, he has lots of fun with, whether it's dressing up as a Pop-Tart, I mean that seriously, or somehow getting involved with the spirit of the school at the game that he is covering. Cole always finds a way to separate himself in a very crowded media space. Cole is today's guest on the Field Talk podcast. Here's a listen. All right, it's great to be joined here by Cole Cubelic. And Cole, I have to be honest with you, I want to start with a thank you, because I'm not sure how you found time for me amidst your very busy schedule. When was the last day that you didn't have to do something for work, including either a radio show, a TV appearance, podcast appearance, you name it? When was the last day you had off?
I don't know. Christmas Day maybe, but I think I still did a couple of things prepping for bowl games later in the day when the kids took naps. So maybe August-ish, but you're preparing for the season and radio still I don't know. The last day that I just woke up and said, we're good. Nothing going on. I don't know when that was.
Well, Cole, you are a very busy man. You host a radio show down in Birmingham with Greg McElroy, very popular show at that. I've had the honor of being on with you in the past. Of course, you cover games for the SEC Network, which takes you all over the SEC map. You got the show Read and React. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. You got your own show, the Cole Cubelic Show, which we encourage you to check out, of course. But I want to hear more about kind of how you got to where you are. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in the state of Alabama, where you still reside. And a guy like me, born in Massachusetts, now lives in Connecticut. I don't think I totally understand and appreciate what the sport of college football means in the state of Alabama. How would you describe what it meant to you growing up?
It was very interesting for me growing up, because in my family, it meant a lot. It really both college and the NFL. My dad's family grew up in Pittsburgh. His great grandfather came over from Croatia. They were steel mill workers, and they were all raised there in Southampton. And so we were big Steeler fans growing up. We would all, Thanksgiving, Christmas, when we were all with each other, it was must-see TV when the Steelers were on. And my dad attended South Carolina. My mother attended South Carolina. I have numerous aunts, uncles, cousins, distant relatives that attended South Carolina. My dad's sister, Mary Ann Grant, was an All-American basketball player at Clemson. She was an alternate for the '88 Olympic team. Her name is up in the rafters. They've retired her number. So there was the Carolina Clemson thing happening a lot when I grew up. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. We moved to Birmingham before I turned 2. And I spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas up until my senior year in high school in Columbia, South Carolina. I was lucky because my mom and dad's family both lived in Columbia, South Carolina. So we could go and just knock it all out in one trip. We always did Christmas Eve at my mom's family's house, Christmas morning at my dad's family's house. My parents were divorced when I was 3. So it just worked. And my cousins were there. Aunts and uncles lived there. It was great. Well, I went to a ton of Carolina Clemson games growing up and knew all about that rivalry and what it was. And I vividly remember, I have no idea how old I was, maybe 6, 7. And we went to Carolina Clemson. It was in Clemson. And my aunt brought everybody to her tailgate, and they had, the big life-size posters that you have of Larry Bird or like Olajuwon, and they had like the measuring stick next to them. They had a William the Refrigerator poster like that. And it was up on somebody's like RV at the tailgate. And my dad's brother, who played golf at South Carolina, he put this giant like circular Gamecock sticker on his mouth on the poster of the thing. And all I remember was my aunt losing it and like just so upset because he ruined the poster, and my dad and his aunt and his brother are just laughing. And I'm just thinking, like, what is happening? I was more interested in the 2 mascots fighting than I was the game back then. But I just remember how important it was to everybody. So growing up in Alabama, I didn't really have a side, but I got to see both sides of it from sort of a neutral stance of how important it was. And when you lost that game, what you went through for the next 365 days. When you won that game, how great it was for the next 365 days. And it was something that people talked about every day. You had to pick sides when you played flag football. You had to let people know when you went to their house if you were going to be rooting for the wrong team, you weren't going to be invited. So it was, I remember spending the night at friend's house in elementary school, Daniel Moore paintings on the wall, Cornelius Bennett sacking Joe Theismann. And that's just what it was. And I can remember when I was a kid, for me, it was more of what college football meant, because we would take the Max bus from my apartment complex. It was 50 cents, and we would ride to Legion Field. Legion Field, probably like 6, 7 miles from where I grew up. And we would get out and just walk around. We didn't have tickets to the game. We didn't know where anybody was, but we just wanted to be in that atmosphere. Because back then, Alabama played the Iron Bowl every year. They played Tennessee. All their big games were there. And so we just wanted to be in that atmosphere. Sometimes maybe fourth quarter, we'd be able to sneak in and get to see a little bit of the game. As I got older, my dad's company had tickets to Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama games. And randomly we'd get some of those. So we'd go see an Auburn, Georgia game or an Alabama, Georgia game, or we'd go over to Athens and watch a game. And it was just, all of it was awesome. Every bit of it. The bands, the cheerleaders, the fans, just the trash talk, every bit of it was incredible. And so I didn't really fall in love with a team until I got to Auburn. And I had a little bit of a Notre Dame phase. I had a little bit of a Miami Hurricane phase. That was like late teenage years, trying to be totally different than everybody else, but always was in the middle of Alabama and Auburn growing up, able to see my friends be a part of it. And then I was recruited by both. So I went to games at both stadiums as a recruit and ended up at Auburn due to an injury. I tore my ACL actually my freshman year in high school. Couldn't have it repaired because my growth plates weren't closed. So I kind of bounced back in my junior year of high school, had a great year, started getting recruited. Senior year, had not had my ACL repaired, but I hit a growth spurt that offseason. Body just really wasn't ready to handle it. I had what they call a pivot shift in the first game, kind of knocked the cartilage, had to have that repaired. Came back for the 6th game of the year after having it scoped and had another one. And the doctors at Health South said, you know what, you're done. Like, that's it. We got to fix this now or you're not going to play anywhere. Thankfully, Auburn hung on. Tennessee dropped me about 2 days before signing day. Alabama dropped me day before signing day. And Terry Bowden offered me a scholarship. So people ask me all the time, what do you think about Terry Bowden? I'm like, that dude gave me a scholarship to play college football. I got nothing bad to say about him. So we're good. But yeah, so then from then on, it's been all Auburn, and best decision I've ever made. Because I tell people all the time, every dime I've made in my life has been because I played football at Auburn. And that's not what people think initially. They think, oh, well, some booster just laced him up with this cushy gig. And that's not it. And I try to tell some of these young college football players this. It's the network. And it's that platform that was provided for me to go do whatever you want. And that's the cool part about playing college football at Michigan or Ohio State or Texas or Tennessee or Florida or LSU or Auburn, Alabama, Georgia. You have a platform that can propel you to anything you want, whether that's millions of NFL dollars. I have friends in packaging sales that play college football that make a ton more money than I ever will. I did well in medical sales for a little while, but all of that happened because of who I knew. And the crazy part about that is when I was growing up, my dad's favorite word was networking. My dad was in sales. He was in the beverage business forever. He's like, network, network, network. I'm like, please, with the networking. Like, I don't want to talk to this person. I don't want to meet that lady. Like, why are we doing this? And now I know, however many years later, it literally makes the world go round. And I've been to job interviews that I was not qualified for. And we've gotten 2 questions in and started talking about Auburn football. And I went on to the next round. So that's just kind of how it works.
Everything really, all roads seem to lead back to Auburn. But I think that I'm not here to litigate the validity of NIL. But one of the factors that I do think has been perhaps under discussed now is that understanding that players profiting off of their name, image, and likeness is important. There is something more to getting a scholarship simply than just playing football for a team. And I think you've kind of cut to the heart of it. Auburn football has been central to so much of your success. And you mentioned that you ended up in medical sales, because I want to talk about Auburn and your media career now, but it doesn't sound like the plan after your playing career, after starting 18 games at Auburn, was to go become someone who has become associated with football, college football. What was life like immediately after college for you?
Yeah, I want to rewind quickly for just a moment because, like, you brought up NIL field and like what we see Jalen Milroe doing with Roback, what we see Quinn Ewers doing with Roback, Cade Klubnik, that's NIL. That is, look at the school that they're attached to, look how they've performed, look at their personality. There's mutual benefit to this relationship. A guy who's a good high school football player who is guaranteed to make X just because he comes there is fake NIL. And that is where a lot of the problems lie with today's college football, hopefully soon to be repaired to a certain extent. I don't know if that's ever going to be just truly repaired, but big difference there. When I got out of school, I would have loved to do what I'm doing now. The difference was back then, you had like 2 TV crews. You had your local AM sports talk station that maybe had 2 live shows. And then you had your 3 local television stations that had their sports people. Where else were you going to work in sports media, sports journalism? Like, you weren't. There weren't podcasts. There weren't dedicated websites, if not 4 or 5, to every collegiate school and every big-time college football program and basketball program and now baseball program. There wasn't d1baseball.com. There weren't all these websites, podcast possibilities, ESPNU, SEC Network, ACC Network. They just weren't real. I couldn't go to YouTube and just do my own show. So as much as I wanted to do it and knew deep down inside that that would be something that I love to do, there just weren't real opportunities. Also, I was tired of being broke, plain and simple field. Like, I wanted some money in the bank.
Yeah.
I was tired of like watching that bank account saying, okay, we can maybe go out tonight, but like, that's going to be it for the rest of the semester. We're going to have to really lay low. Cause I would always pay my rent first when I got my scholarship check. And it would go from like 1,200. God, this shows how old I am. It would go from like 1,200 to like 650. And I'm thinking 650 for 3 months, with utilities and cable and everything else. We made it though. And so I had an aunt who, her husband was in medical sales. She had a long career in pharmaceutical sales. And she said, listen, a lot of people with your background do this. They're successful. This is how I can help you get into it. And she kind of went to work, helped me with resumes, helped connect me to people. She actually found interviews for me. And I did kind of move home after college and coach middle school football for about a year. After I made my offensive line roll one day after practice, I think that was about the end of my coaching career because all the parents wanted me fired. Yeah. If you don't know what rolling is, you literally lay down and just roll. And it sounds easy, but I promise you, it will torture you in a hurry. And I think I kind of mentally thought that 8th graders and 7th graders could roll almost as much as, varsity college football players. And that didn't really work. So I got into pharmaceutical sales. There was an expansion interview in Birmingham, Alabama. It was at the Winfrey Hotel. And I think they were hiring 1,000 people. Santa Fe Synthalabo was the company. And that was one of those interviews that I referenced. I showed up. My sales experience was just for feet and foot action in Birmingham, Alabama, selling sneakers at both of those places. But I was like, hey, I have sold stuff. I mean, I worked on commission, so I get it. And I got that first interview, couple questions in, Auburn football. Move on to the next one, couple questions in, What about Ole Miss this year? Talked about Ole Miss football. What was it like playing against Ole Miss over there in Oxford? Talked about that. And that got me to the next round. I ended up getting one of those jobs. Did pharmaceutical sales for about 3.5 years. A guy that I met while I was working in pharmaceutical sales, also a big Auburn fan, happened to be a manager for Stryker in the area for Stryker Instruments. He hires me. I go work there and did that for about 8 years after college. But thankfully, I found a way to sort of dip my toe in media and kind of get started there. If you want me to like just roll into that, I could do it.
Hey, was it 2010 when you first got started in media? Is that correct? Was it the year that Auburn won the national championship?
First full-time job.
First full-time job. So timing is everything in life, right?
It is. I mean, and you talk about like, I thought the off seasons and the seasons of college football were going to be the easiest things ever. Because I came in to do an afternoon drive show, and every day with Cam, it was something different. Like somebody had a tape, somebody had evidence, somebody had this. He was getting suspended. He was going to play. I was like, this is the easiest job on earth. Like I just turn on the phones and here we go.
Yeah,
absolutely. But like I told you before, I knew I wanted to do it. And back to that networking, my dad had a friend named Steve Shelton in Huntsville, Alabama, where I took that pharmaceutical job. And my dad lived in Huntsville, and that's where I moved. So I did have some connections there. It made life a little bit easier. And I was driving by this office building one day where his cluster of radio stations were housed. And this idea just hit me. I said, I'm going to roll in there and just ask him, because one of his stations, the Rocket, which is a rock station, they still go today, carried Auburn football. And I said, I'm just going to go in there and ask him if I can do like a pregame show. Go in, he's in his office, secretary sends me up. And I said, Ben Leard, my quarterback at Auburn, lived in Decatur, Alabama, where my wife's from. So it's about 20 minutes west of Huntsville. And I said, hey, listen, Ben Leard lives right over here. I live here. We know the team better than anybody. We were on the team last year. Why don't you give us like a pregame show, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever you want. And he goes, yeah, cool. And I learned my first, probably still to this day, most valuable lesson when it comes to the radio industry. He looked at me and he said, if you can sell it, you can have it. And it was like he was speaking French to me at that point. I did not know what he was referencing. And I said, sure. And I walked out and I actually had to call him like an hour later. And I said, what do you mean by that, by the way? He said, oh no, you got to go sell ads and get advertisers on. If you can do that, you can have a show. So it's just that easy. And to this day, like when you ride around your favorite radio station is playing something that's maybe a totally different demographic or somebody you know shouldn't be on, they probably bought that airtime. And that's like just how it works. And so I would say that I went out and sold a bunch of ads. Ben Leard went out and sold most of the ads. I think I sold one to a flower shop, and we ended up getting on. So we did it and they liked it. And then Ben moved to Auburn the next year. So we did it from Auburn. Well, the people we did it right before on the same stage were the Auburn Network folks, because that's where they did their pregame show. It was on the same station. And one of the guys that was the GM of the Auburn Network, Stan White, was moving to do radio. At this point in time, once again, dating myself, there was a network called CSS. It was Comcast Sports Southeast. CSS aired replays of Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and a couple other schools' broadcasts. Like CST, I think, was LSU, and a couple others like Florida, and had a different one. But the Auburn replays went on CSS, and they had their own broadcast team. And he's like, hey, Stan's going over to do radio. Would you want to do the spring game for CSS? I was like, hell yes. Like, let's go. So had never done it, had no experience with it. Actually, I had done it. I'll tell you about that in a second. And I was like, let's just try it. And Andy Burcham was the guy that I worked with. He's the voice of the Auburn Tigers now on radio. We did it. They said it's great. They said, do you want to do the season? Absolutely. Going back to timing, that happened to be the 2004 season, which we're about to be doing that for. And so we had a couple great games. It was obviously a magical season. Auburn, great run, goes undefeated regular season and beats Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl. And then the next year, this guy at CSS calls me and he said, I got a proposal for you, but I don't know if you're going to like it. I said, sure. He said, do you want to do my Sunbelt package next year? Now at this time, so this is like a year or two later, ESPN was taking up all the rights of these games. Like Jefferson Pilot was going away, which was like the local regional broadcast. And so I was kind of weighing it out in my brain, similar to an athlete, thinking, if I'm ever going to do this or be good at this, I need reps. I need to do a lot of these. I'm going to have maybe 3 Auburn games, like 2 CSS and 1 pay-per-view game. Once again, I'm old. There were pay-per-view college football games back then. And I said, I'll take it, man. I said, because I need the 13 games. Like, and knowing what I know now, obviously, I could have easily said, well, can I just do the 2 Auburn games when they're available and like skip the? And he would have said yes. I wasn't trying to leverage anything. I was like, just give me what you got and I'll do it and be happy. And so I did those for 3 years. Totally incredible. My first year, play-by-play was Joe Davis, who's doing the World Series, by the way.
Yeah, you made Joe Davis.
Next, he was doing Montgomery Biscuits game on radio. The next year, I worked with Joe Block, who splits Milwaukee Brewers TV and radio. The third year, I worked with Tom Dorr, who played basketball at Missouri and called 3 Bulls championships on WGN.
I'm starting to notice a trend here.
So I'm like, I don't know if I could have planned that any better. That ends up rolling into longer story of ESPN takes it all over. ESPN3 was then the only place that had Sunbelt games. I won't say the guy's name, but I called him and said, hey, I can help you. I know these teams and leagues. He's like, listen, ESPN3 is going to be like a training ground for us. It's like our minor league now. And you're not very good at calling games. So like, I don't need you anymore. And I was like, holy hell. So I didn't know what to do at that point. And I had a friend, his name's Bo Kerr. He lives here in Birmingham now. He went to Auburn with me and we had a bunch of classes together. And he was like, I used to work for ESPN Plus. Again, I'm old. All these things I'm mentioning like don't exist anymore. And he did sales. He goes, I know all the people you need to be talking to. And he writes down this list and it's like Steve Ackles, Stephanie Drewley, all these different names. And I'm like, okay. And I just start calling them and calling them and calling them and calling them and sending my films and everything that I had. Long story short, way down the road, Steve Ackles gave me an opportunity, got to call a couple of games. First year I worked with Kevin Weidel and Mike Cousins. Kevin Weidel's now a scout with the Ravens. Mike Cousins does ESPN radio and up and up and up. Second year I go on with Tom and Jordan. We've been together for 8 years now and found somehow a way to just grind it up and keep going. But yeah, 2010 was the first full-time radio job I got, making $1,000 a month, by the way.
Wow. $1,000. Wow.
I mean, I was living.
That would have got you like how many months of college rent back in the day
based
on the
back in the
calculations
day.
you were
Absolutely.
telling us. Yeah.
Thankfully I did. I saved some of my money from medical sales. I think I burned through that in about 4 months. And I ended up having to walk away and I went and did packaging sales like my buddy did. I wasn't near as good as he was. I tried to start an insurance company with another friend, hated my life when I did that. And then the guy who I tried to start an insurance company with saw how miserable I was, called a buddy at another radio station, is like, listen, if you put this guy on mornings, I'll be his top sponsor. We'll get everything going. But he needs to be on the radio. And he gave me an opportunity. And that was Huntsville, then led to Jocks in Birmingham. And here we are today.
So very successful radio show in Birmingham, but where someone like me sees you the most is covering college football. And I think that as I watch whatever you are covering, whatever the event is, whatever show you're on, I think if I were to say your signature trait, it's that you just have a blast. You seem to be legitimately having more fun than anybody else, even the players on the field. The question I have is A, where's that mentality come from? And B, did you feel like early on in your career, you were more focused on trying to be the informative guy to show that you were serious and knew what you were talking about? Or was the idea from the jump basically, hey, you guys are going to find out that I know what I'm talking about, but you're going to know right away that I'm having a blast doing what I'm doing?
It was definitely not the plan early on field. Matter of fact, I made that mistake a lot. And I've had a lot of people tell me the 3 things that I have been told more than anything else: 1, slow down; 2, smile; 3, have fun. And I've tried to sort of continue to take those in and do those more and more.
You always have a blast now, though. I mean,
I do now, but I didn't early on. And I see people doing this so clearly nowadays, and I'm not mad at them for it. And I don't think it's bad because I get it. I did it. I understand. But there is a prove it part of what a lot of us do. And I think when you're a former athlete and you're getting into this business, what did you have to do to play all the time? You had to prove yourself. Like you had to go prove, I can block that guy better than this guy. Like my reach block is quicker, faster than his. Like my hand placement's better than his. I know the playbook better than his. I know all these fronts and can get us in the right protections better than the next guy. So you roll into being an analyst on television, you want to prove yourself. I can tell you what all these coverages are, and I can use all this terminology that nobody else knows what it is. Took me a long time to realize that and understand that. And it's hard because you have it back here, but when you distribute that, it doesn't mean that anybody knows what in the world you're talking about. So it really became something of there are ways to explain this game that are not really complicated. It's like my buddy Ben Leard, who I just told you about a minute ago. His number one quote when we were in college: "Football ain't hard." He used to say it all the time. And we would come up and we'd see these different looks. And he's like, guys, he was from Hartwell, Georgia. Football ain't hard. I was like, you know what? He's right. Like, we just block people, tackle people, score touchdowns. Like, that's it. And so a lot of times I see people that are trying to be analysts or trying to do their own thing. And it's just like all this verbatim and this jargon. And I even get lost. And I'm thinking, man, if I'm kind of lost, what's the guy that never played football thinking watching the show right now? So if you can mix a little bit of the informative side and have fun with it and enjoy it, I also think, Phil, there's a part of it that, like, excuse my language, but like, I can't believe I'm doing this shit for a living, to be honest with you. Like, I mean, really, I tell people I haven't worked in almost 10 years. And not that it's not work and not that it doesn't take a lot, but it's the time part is a grind. Being away from my family is a grind, but there's not one part of it that I don't love. There's not one part of it that I don't like. Like McElroy and I had a long discussion today, just talking about like work and different things and like people that don't like to watch film. And that's our favorite part of it. If I had the time, it's funny because people ask me all the time. I've been asked the same question in different portions of my life. How much do you prepare for a game every week? And I think about when my wife and I first got married, and I would watch like 10 or 11 hours of film a day. Now I'll literally go watch like one half of one side of the ball, and then I'll go play with my kids. And then they're doing something, and I'll come watch, one team's 3 series of one team's defense. I'm like, all right, we'll get back to that in a minute. Now we got to go color. Or I'll watch like one player and like one game of one player. And then, okay, now we got to go hit baseballs outside. Like, it's get it in where you can fit it in now. And it used to be just sit, grind, go as long as you can, ignore everything else, get it done. Now, like, I've got my film up during our radio show sometimes. And during commercial breaks, I'll pop through a couple series real fast. So it's just fit it in whenever you can. But I do that because I love it, not because I have to. I feel like I have to, but nobody's sitting there monitoring my film watching, making sure, checking a box that I'll watch X amount of plays during the week. So I just love everything that goes with it. I love conversations with coaches. I love learning about kids, things that we don't know. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in college football right now is we think we know who these guys are. And actually, Quinn Ewers is one of my favorite examples of this. We had the Alamo Bowl 2 years ago, and Sark is going to let us talk to, I can't remember who he had on defense, and we had Quinn. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. This kid's coming in with the monster truck and the Kambuka deal, and he's transferring. He didn't play his senior year of high school. He's got the mullet. Like, this is okay. Like, here comes the Andre Agassi of college football. Once again, I'm old. And like, we'll see how this goes. We sit down with him, and like, we can barely get anything out of him. And everything he says is on to his teammates. Oh, my offensive line just is this. My receivers are this good. Coach Sark is the one that did that. He put no credit to himself. Very soft-spoken. And I remember Jordan Rodgers and I walk out of that meeting thinking, that's not what we thought we were going to get. And that's not what America thinks that is, by the way, at all. And that happens to us 10, 11, 12 times a year, where people think they know this guy and they don't. I love that part of it. I love hearing stories. I love getting to know personalities. There's a bunch of kids that we just sit down with and talk to, and it's like, there is a whole nother human that nobody has any idea, any inkling what they're all about. So I love all that. I love talking to coaches. Like, my biggest challenge is asking coaches questions at the end of the half and at the end of the game, because I try to be as different as I can. And I want to ask very detailed questions. And sometimes I'm asking my producer, what do you think about this? We'll go to break. I'll ask Jordan, Tom, no, I don't know about that. What about this? And then I'll try to think of a way to ask it. Like, I really beat myself up over it, but it's because I want it to be good. And I love the fact that some people appreciate different style questions that coaches answer in a different way. So other than being away from my family, there's not a single part of it that I don't like. And so I think when you can find that, it's not going to feel like work.
Beats having a job, it sounds like, for sure. No, you talk about all the things you love, and while people may not know it if they saw you today, you did talk about your career as an offensive lineman, and you still love offensive line play. And not that I don't appreciate offensive line play, but I know the world. It's not like offensive line play is usually the kind of thing that gets everybody fired up. You find a way to make that fun. You have so much insight on Twitter, specifically talking about offensive line play, breaking down protections and just highlighting players, full slabs. How did that become a thing for you? Because you've now created, I think, kind of a following on top of all the other things that have generated the following for you, now people know if they want to see a couple of big boys from the SEC or whatever game you're covering moving some bodies around, there's a pretty decent chance that you're going to be highlighting them at some point.
It's I tell you what warms my heart more than anything else is when someone else posts an offensive lineman destroying somebody and the next person replies to it and just tweets my handle and just tags me in it. Yep. I'm just like, yes, we've arrived. Like everybody's, it started out and everybody would say, how did you see that? How did you watch that? And I was like, bro, my eyes don't follow the ball and your eyes shouldn't either. Like you should be watching right there because that's where the game is won. I think part of it is just knowing inherently, because I went through it, that we don't get a lot of credit and not a lot of people talk about us. And there's a lot of cool stuff that happens. And there's a lot of stuff that's not easy to do that guys are pulling off on a regular basis that needs to be celebrated. Now, it's definitely not me, Aaron Taylor, Jeff Schwartz, Mike Golick Jr., Duke Manyweather. Like there's a lot of guys out there that understand what it's about, have played it, have coached it, that get it, that are also sharing it. Eric McLean now on the ACC network. Like there's a lot of guys that are doing it and that all helps. But I'll tell you this, I don't think that if I was a tight end, quarterback, running back, receiver, that I would be where I am today. Because that little niche kind of helped me talk about things in a different way. It helped me show other people that there's other ways to win games. It's not just throwing and catching. It's not just sacking the quarterback. It's not just picking off passes down the field. And I think people became interested in it a little bit like, well, no one's ever told me about that before. I've never seen that explained before. And I actually had somebody at ESPN. It was John Vassallo. I don't think he'll mind me using his name because he was being honest and he was being real. I can remember the first time I sat down with him, he said, Cole, I've watched a couple of your games. I actually think you call a great game. He said, I think you're not far off from anybody we have here. He said, the problem is you didn't win a Heisman. You weren't drafted in the first round and you weren't an All-American and no one knows who the hell you are. So this is going to be a long road for you. And I was like, talk about a kick in the chin. Like, and we haven't even found anything for me to do yet. But I think that part of it too kind of awakened me to say, all right, well, we can't go about it the way those guys do. So the first round receiver, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, like I have something they don't have. And that is the knowledge of how things work right there and what it's like to do it and how it feels and what it actually does to certain plays. So I don't know how I ultimately really came to it. There wasn't like a grand awakening, but I think the gradual me talking about it more and more and people finally starting to pay attention to it, that just pushed me further into it. And I was like, all right, now I got to lean into this. And I do sometimes feel like, hey guys, I know stuff about other things too, but if that's what they want to talk about, I'm always going to be about that.
No doubt about it. Every time I see a big hulking offensive lineman, especially from the SEC, you definitely come to mind for me. We could probably do this for a full hour, and this feels like this has been the fastest 30 minutes. I wish when I was working out, it went by this fast because I would be in the best shape of my life if time moved this quickly. But I think we'll end it here. While there are plenty of spirited debates on Twitter about conferences not named the SEC, as somebody, again, I'm a guy from Massachusetts who lives in Connecticut who follows college football closely. It definitely feels like the SEC is just a little bit different from every other conference, certainly in football, but in and across really all sports. As somebody who has lived it, not just as an athlete, but also now somebody who not just covers, but is clearly passionate about more than just SEC football, SEC basketball and baseball, and you name it. What is it like being a part of the SEC? And what is it like following this conference and living in an area where this conference matters probably even more than professional sports?
It's the best. It really is. And I will say there are times that it sucks. But there was an Arkansas Ole Miss game that Tom and Jordan and I did from the field a couple of years ago. It ended up being a blowout. We kind of got loose with it, maybe had a little bit too much fun, but hey, you give up 728 yards of offense. I shouldn't probably expect you to just be serious the whole time. And I still catch hell from those fans, like constantly, daily basis. If I try to say something nice about them, you're a loser. We don't need you. Like don't ever come back to Oxford. I'm just kind of like, wow, that was one game, but that's part of what makes it great. I go other places and people always ask me, Phil, why is it different? How is it really different? And the only way I know to lay it out to people is this. We love to hate more than we love to love. And that's essentially it. Like we spend more time. And I learned this the hard way. I learned this the hardest of hard ways. So what's weird about when you play in the Iron Bowl is I do think it's one of the cleanest rivalries in college football. If you watch and pay attention to it, like what was the last fight you saw in the Iron Bowl? What was the last after the game skirmish in the, like, there's not a lot of them. And like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, it's why I put it way up above where a lot of people put other rivalries. Those dudes are trying to take each other out. Like 4 or 5 years ago, that was the ugliest rivalry in college football. They've cleaned it up a lot, but it got bad for a little while. So I don't believe your true hate for your rival comes until you're done. Well, what happened a couple years after I was done? Nick Saban got hired. So I spent all this energy hoping, praying, wishing that Alabama would lose at everything. And by God, they started winning everything.
Everything, man.
And I'm going to tell you, man, that will suck the freaking life out of you to just want them to lose one game and it just doesn't happen. Like, just don't win a championship game and it doesn't happen. So that's the part that I think there are more of us, whether it is LSU, Florida, whether it's Georgia, Georgia Tech, whether it's even I know those are cross conference, but it involves SEC teams, Auburn, Alabama, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Clemson. Like, we spend more time disapproving of the other side than we do approving of our side. And that's what I think separates it from everything else anywhere else.
It really is so special. I've only been to a couple of SEC games, but it was each atmosphere is just so unique and so different, and the passion of the fan bases is unmistakable. And I'm not just talking about the teams at the very top. Sometimes the teams that are the bottom feeders in that year in that sport still show that they are as loyal to the soil as it gets. Well, Cole Cubelic, seriously, we could have talked forever. You are instant entertainment. I find you so fun to watch and listen to. So I really appreciate you joining us here on the Field Talk podcast, a loyal Roback guy as well. Thanks for all you do. Hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. Appreciate Roback as well.
I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Cole Cubelic as much as I did. Truly, just find Cole to be somebody who every time you watch him, it's hard not to smile and be entertained, because you know that he loves and he is as passionate about what he is doing as every fan deserves for their announcer or radio host or podcast host or anything else that Cole does, because let's be honest, it's a lot, should be. A reminder, a huge thank you to Roback for making the Field Talk podcast possible. Head on over to roback.com for all the incredible gear and enter the promo code FIELD, my name, FIELD, for 20% off your first order. Until next time, we'll talk to you again soon here on the Field Talk podcast.